I'm going to show you a selection of games from one of my best students. It's a girl who's around getting to the expert level in chess around 2000. And a couple of years ago, I taught her to play the Queen's Gambit accepted. So she's playing against decent competition. Not generally not grandmaster level, although there is some example of that as well. So you will kind of see how do the games go at the level of like 18 to 2200, right? A little bit like closer to your level, right? So let's start with that. Let me get all of this set up. And here we go, our first example, copy games. So I will also do my introduction of this opening. As we start, set position, copy the PGN, here we go. And okay, we can have the eval bar on, that's pretty helpful. And yeah, sure. We start like this. From the black side. Okay, Queen's Gambit accepted is we take the pawn, right? White generally doesn't have any problems capturing this pawn back. We don't try to hold on to it. But white does have two fundamentally different approaches here, Lula, which is, would you know what they are?
I saw that they can either basically go e4 or play like knight f3, e3. Is that right?
Exactly. Two main approaches to getting back the pawn. So let's start with e4 because that is the most aggressive.
Yeah.
Aggressive one where white tries to emerge from the opening with the beautiful center, getting the pawn back. So of course black has to somehow meet the center. And that is why all four of black's main moves here have to do with attacking the white center. I don't know if you got that far in your analysis, Lula, but there's four moves possible for black. It's quite a vast choice.
Yeah, I saw, I don't think I saw knight c6, but I saw the other ones briefly. I haven't looked at this very much, but I have looked a little bit.
Which move do you intuitively like, or do you know which one is like the most?
I feel like I would either go for like c5 or knight f6. I think e5 like looks quite aggressive.
Yeah. So e5 is the main move. It is probably the second most popular move is knight f6. So the idea of knight f6 is that you provoke the pawn to move forward, and then you go into the center like that. And white has a space advantage. Of course, it's an interesting line, strategically complicated, but e5 is more of, I would say, a classical move, right? Where you're not giving your opponent a space advantage from the opening. You're trying to fight for that. And of course, it might look a little weird. You're putting the pawn where it can be taken, but I can assure you that no one actually captures that pawn, because if they do, you're going to trade queens. They lose the right to castle. And just like simple move, knight c6 looks pretty good here. You're attacking that pawn. Your bishop can get developed to e6. You're going to castle queenside, get a check on their king. So that's why white doesn't go for this move. Now you might see a move here, Lula, that you won't see so much in master games, but if you play people below that level, like let's say 1800 and below, there is a move here which looks pretty logical and has been played against my student a number of times. So do you have any idea like what that move is? It's not the best move, but it's a logical move.
I can see some people probably playing d5. I just played okay.
It's d5, right?
Yeah.
I think you like when you begin playing the Queen's Gambit accepted, like you're quite likely to actually get this. Like my student has had this move played against her by numerous players, including, fairly high rated ones. Like it's not just beginners playing d5, because, d5 is a very sensible looking move. You're thinking you're taking space as white, like avoiding any trades in the center and capturing back that pawn on c4. So what is the problem with this move? Well, the problem is that we develop attacking this pawn, and when they protect it, we go b5. And the whole issue is that we don't just allow white to capture back this pawn. We play b5, trying to hold on to it, using the fact that this knight is overloaded between trying to take the pawn and protecting e4. And if they do take, then we can capture on e4 and also have bishop c5 ideas, quite annoyingly attacking that pawn. Yeah, it doesn't have quite that power, but b5, yeah, it's a good move to know that you're not just letting white capture that pawn. Yes, Laz Cooper agreeing that there is queen a4 check. All right. So now let's see what is actually the main line, right? So there's these two moves that are suboptimal. So the main line is knight f3. And they simply protect the pawn, which, well, we have a few different moves here. Lula, we can give a check or we can take, but I recommended this line to my student. And they can take the pawn, but it's not really their most aggressive move to go for like the queen trade line. If they do that, we can trade queens with them. We develop our knight.
It's not cool to play chess. It's not cool to
tempo on that pawn. And then we tend to develop this bishop here, tempo on that knight. And black is doing fine in these positions. This is an example. Like if they go f3, bishop c5, bishop e3, knight c6, and black is perfectly comfortable here. So the main move that white has is like this, right? Where basically we're up a pawn. If you count the number of pawns, black has 7, white has 6. And what is white playing for here? Well, white is playing for quick development. They generally just want a castle, play knight d2, knight b3, capture the pawn, and try to show that they're rather better here because of that center majority they have with the e4 pawn. So, of course, a lot of things can happen along the way, but that's a general thing that white plays for. Also, one thing we can say here, Lula, white has already another kind of advantage, which is pretty clear, which is what?
They have, well, they're ready to castle.
But their advantage in the position is what?
They have 2 pieces out and most,
development advantage, right? So that's why they're willing to be temporarily down a pawn. And I can say, Lula, we don't try to protect that pawn like that. You know, why that exactly is bad, probably even things like knight e5 or knight g5, right? So black doesn't really have a chance to keep that pawn, so we don't try so hard to hold on to it. So one of the lines here that I recommended to my student is actually, it's a very sharp line, knight c6, piece development, right? So these 2 squares, knight g5 is not a big deal because now you always have knight e5, you can attack their bishop and protect your pawn. So they castle, right? All theory. And now bishop e6. So you're trying to neutralize their attack against f7. And the problem is, if you go moves like knight f6, you're always going to get met with e5 somewhere. They're not going to let you just rest peacefully and get on with development. So bishop e6, you're neutralizing that bishop. And now there's 2 moves by white. Fundamentally different lines. There's the pin the knight line, and then there's bishop takes bishop. But most people, I would say this line is more popular, and it is the main line. Bishop takes e6. f takes e6. And so black is still up a pawn, but white gets it back with this move. Right? Yes. So you see there's definitely something, there's a forcing angle to this line, and it leads to quite an unusual position. Like all of this happens by force, and so here we are. Okay, there's different ways for black to put the pieces there, but actually, Lula, after studying some computer games, I recommended this kind of line to my student with bishop d6. Okay, so what is the general scenario here? I would say you're in a highly unbalanced position, highly unbalanced with regards to pawn structure. Black has more weaknesses in the pawn structure, but there's also some strengths in it, right? So we have open file for the rook, that's a plus. We have like a pass pawn on d4, I would say that's a plus. Although in a way, Lula, if you told me, would I like to put that pawn back on f7 to make my pawn structure normal on the king side, I mean, I would consider it, but that's not, that's not a choice that we're given. So yeah, we're going to consider that our pawn on d4 is a strength. And generally, white's queen side has a little bit of trouble coming out, right? Because the knight can't go to c3. Those are the plus sides for black. So what are the minuses for black? Well, the minuses, the weaknesses in the pawn structure, lots of separated pawns. The king is a little weaker. d4 is not only a strength, it can be a weakness. There's issues with how to protect it. If you put that pawn on e5, sometimes we do that, but that's a very double-edged move strategically. Because even though it solidifies your pawn, it makes your bishop bad. Right? So that's the outline here. So I cannot say that this is like an easy position to play, but I do find it interesting and double-edged. So let's take a look at a few moves in this game. So white played b3. Okay, I mean, I guess they want to go bishop b2. They want to neutralize our rook. And basically we go knight e7. So at least there's a sort of logic in black setup, bishop d6, knight e7. You're familiar with that from your French defense line, where sometimes we arrange the pieces like that instead of putting the knight on f6. If you ask me, well, why doesn't the knight go to f6? Well, certainly the threat of this fork is going to be more of an issue in the future. You're not giving as much support to the knight on c6, and you're blocking the f file. So I can't say outright that the move just looks, completely losing to me. But yeah, the idea of bishop d6 is that we're putting this knight on e7. And knight d2. Castles. So I would say, okay, these moves are easy to make. That's the good news. That these moves we can make easily. Then there's going to be some decisions later on that are going to be more complicated. By the way, Lula, you always want to pay attention to the F file here.
Okay. Whenever
you got that open file, there's a knight there. I mean, of course, exchange sacrifices are very much part of this, and white shouldn't be allowing them, which is why white often pulls the queen back somewhere on this diagonal, or they put the knight on d2 and keep it there. Or the Lula, we might see a maneuver like that. Yes, white might just take that knight out of the file and use it to blockade the pawn. So there's lots of ways to handle this position, right? So it's like a tricky line to learn. I think the best you can do is learn some main ideas, right? For black, like what's the nature of this position? And then it really is like move by move, because there's no way you can encompass all of like white's options here. White played bishop a3. And basically, my student in this game is actually playing 2,500 rated GM. So I can say, she was a little bit overmatched in this game. But however, like even rated like, 1900s, she managed to make 13 moves with black, getting a decent position. So I would say that's an opening success of sorts. And And yeah, that's what we're looking for, just to get playable positions. So now is kind of the key moment. And what options would you consider here for black? Yeah, let's just think about this.
I don't think I would want to capture on a3. I think our bishop is really good, and if they want to trade, I feel like we should let them trade. I feel like I was gonna say I would look at rook b6, but the queen goes back to a4, and I don't think there's.
So rook b6, I kind of remember. I believe the computer mentioned this kind of move, so it's not terrible. But yeah, I guess I'm after queen a4. I don't.
Yeah, I couldn't see anything
really see
further.
Much. There could be some sort of tactics. Let me just check that. Like rook b6, queen a4. And I just wonder, is there anything with knight e5? Because the only way, yeah, well, I don't know what the rook is doing here. If you trade, the queen takes, they're kind of closer to knight c4. This move, yeah, probably that's not it. I assume they're gonna, I had some, hopes of taking the queen, and then taking the bishop, but most likely this is not it. And there's bishop here, and then this pawn is hanging, so you got to take with the rook, and then okay, yeah, this is definitely
this is bad.
Be avoided. This is like we're losing a pawn for nothing, and white just has vastly better pawn structure. The point of rook b6 to slide it. Yeah, well, slide it on the 6th rank. The problem, kaleidoscope guy, is that it does feel kind of awkward to be stepping into this move. So I would be kind of careful with that. I mean, we can see how the computer tries to make this work, but I don't see any particular advantage to this move, like why we really need the rook there. So let's see if we can come up with another move.
Yeah, I was also going to calculate knight b4. But then I wasn't sure if the queen could take on a7, or if that was too risky. I think.
Oh yeah, knight b4 is an interesting move. One of the issues with it. Okay, so let's take a look, because I would say, yeah, this is an active looking move. It can be explored. Is a7 the problem? I would say that's not really the thing that would scare me the most, because there is knight 2.
Yeah, for sure.
But maybe the move that would bother me a bit here is queen c4. Queen c4, right? So of course the square can be used by their knight or their queen, or who knows, sometimes they're rooks, but that's maybe less common. And now the problem is this pawn. So we're not able to go knight c2.
Yeah, no, we haven't really achieved anything.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what you need to watch out for, Lula. You need to watch out for the pawn weaknesses here, because it's not just about defending the pawn. Like, sure, we can defend the pawn like that. Yeah, we're not losing the pawn necessarily, right? But you got to watch out for, to make sure you still have a counterplay, because if you put too many pawns in dark squares, not so good for your bishop. Your pawns are getting, they're blocked, right? So even though they look impressive, they're not actually going anywhere. There is that. I don't know if in this position, what exactly white will do. Of course, this pawn was pinned, so we didn't have a chance to go e5. Certainly, I would be taking a look at knight g5. I would be looking at that move. And I guess that pawn can still be protected by rook f6. Yeah, I wouldn't say that this is absolutely atrocious, but this is also an idea. Maybe we can crawl out like that. So just as an example, Lula, let's say rook AE1, trying to go here. By the way, our rook has some decent potential. Decent potential on the 6th rank, and I would say this move looks like a nice improvement. You know what's interesting, Lula? I have only made a couple of moves here, just sort of thinking out loud, right? And
yeah,
I cannot defeat the evaluation bar, right? So I'm playing moves that make sense to me, but I wasn't really able to refute Black's play. You know, just kind of thinking on my own here. And you know, even it kind of shows even like the move C5, right? It's not, well, actually, you know what, the problem with this move, I just realized there is, I think, a tactical problem. Isn't just E5. Yeah, I just figured out that, you know, maybe just about the C5 pawn. Maybe just immediately use that pawn, right? So maybe positionally C5 is not even so bad, but just tactically. You move and then you start losing that pawn, and obviously that's a big problem, right? So yes, pawn weaknesses are really a big theme of this line, that you really have to look for counterplay and stay active, Lula, because what you don't want to let your opponent have is just like these free attacks on the C and files against your pawns as you're like passively, right? So this is very much a counterplay line, and you got to be prepared to make, you know, every move is going to have importance in this particular line. So in a way, it's what makes this line challenging, right? But it also makes it, I would say, one of the funner lines in the Queen's Gambit Accepted. So yeah, you just have to be up for it, you know, mentally, that this is the nature of the play when they play into this E4 line. Kaleidoscope Guy says, nobody said knight G6, right? Yeah, nobody said knight G6. We haven't gotten to that yet, but you are right. In fact, this is a very common move in these positions, Lula.
Okay.
You can see why is that a common move? Because it just makes the knight a lot better.
Yeah.
And we're going for some active play with knight F4. You know, that queen likes to try to come back on this diagonal sometimes, but obviously not really a good idea when that knight is going to go to F4. And basically we can stop here. We've made 13 moves. I know that the computer evaluated this position quite okay for Black, but we can try just making, you know, a few moves on our own to get the point of this position. So let's say they take our bishop, right? That's okay. It's an obvious kind of idea. I mean, they put the bishop on A3. What if they take? What do you think we take back with? Because we do have a choice there.
I would want to take with the queen, just because we already have so many pawn weaknesses. And so I would be hesitant to double the deep ones. But
well, I'll tell you something, Lula. I don't think we're really harming our pawn structure that much when we take with a C pawn. I mean,
okay,
it's not like the doubled pawns there. I mean, because what we have here, Lula, is a backwards pawn on C7.
That's true, yeah.
So it's not exactly a strong pawn to have. So pawn structure, I'm not sure is being harmed by that, but it's more like the piece activity. Like our queen is getting a little bit closed up, right? So I guess I would find it, first of all, a bit of a challenging recapture. Like I think there's pluses and minuses in both. If you had to like really press me, right, on what I would do, what would I do if I really had to make a decision? I think the queen. Yeah, I think that is my instinct, just like you were thinking as well, because it keeps the queen more active. And let's see if the eval bar agrees. Well, he seems not to. He actually likes the C capture. Look at that, Lula. See, that's something we learned. I learned too. Yeah, I mean, I knew this move wasn't so bad, but there is some difference between those moves. The computer definitely prefers this improvement in the pawn structure. And yeah, I was concerned about the queen being a little bit passive, but I guess it's so much better to just get that pawn out of the C file. And when they go rook C1, which is their obvious move, we just go rook F to C8. So bringing the rooks to the queen side. In some of these positions, you see, Lula, when we play E5, it's no longer as ugly because we don't have a dark squared bishop on the board anymore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then we have that strong passed pawn on D4. So, I mean, we have knight f4 ideas. We have knight E5 ideas. I think it, depends on what they do here. But yeah, I mean, I can see that black is okay. I mean, I don't think it's a disaster if you take with the queen. But let's see why it seems less preferable. Rook AC1, yeah. So simply bearing down on that C file. So yeah, one of the issues here, I think if we play knight B4, is that they take on D6 and take on D4 with a knight. So let me look at that, knight B4. They just take, and you see the problem is not just that we lost one pawn, because who knows, we could get that back, but more weaknesses. And these pawns are definitely weak. So that's the issue, right? This pressure on the C file, and black has to be, let's say, like a lot more positionally careful than white, who doesn't have those kinds of weaknesses. And I was thinking we could go rook B6 here, but yeah, queen back anywhere, and you see now our knight still can't move because of that pressure. We're getting a little tied up. We can't go there because they capture us, and if you take with a knight, you lose the pawn. So it's still, it's still not over, Lula, and I kind of like the move the computer is suggesting here, which is this prophylactic move, rook F7. He's just noticing the weakness. He's like, all right, I don't want to be pinned to the pawn. I'm going to protect it and threaten knight, like let's say knight E5. So even like this, right? I mean, I wouldn't say it's easy for white to completely refute black's play, even if they capture like the suboptimal way. So let's see what else makes sense other than the capture on D6. So what if white doesn't change the pawn structure? Another obvious move is rook C1. Sorry, guys, after 4 hours of talking, you got to clear your throat a little bit. Rook AC1 attacking our knight. So what are we going to do here, Lula?
If we move at A7, I think does hang.
Yeah, well, don't forget that A7 is, I'll tell you something. Don't pay too much attention to this. I mean, that tends not to be such a big deal. And, there's rook A8. I mean, there's probably going to be some tactical way that black can
that's true.
Be okay there, right? So that's not the biggest theme. But right now, yeah, like we're probably looking for some active way to defend. If we go rook B6, there's queen A4, which does look a bit annoying. Again, the rook is a little awkward on B6. So I have kind of an instinct to play another move, but let's see if we come to the same idea.
Wonder if we can play move the knight to E5.
Which knight?
The C. Oh, I guess we can move the G knight as well to defend. Initially, I was thinking about moving the C knight.
Yeah, I think this move, I was also looking at that, but I thought there might be a tactical problem with that, Lula, because we don't want to lose this pawn, right?
Yeah, that's true.
They capture us on D6 first, and ultimately, don't they just wind up winning that pawn?
Yeah, I think so.
Because even if we trade the knights, it doesn't really change anything. One knight just replaces the other, and we still going to lose that pawn in the end. So we actually have to be very, very careful, right? This is like a hanging kind of position. It's not like a stable structure.
No. Um,
So how about this move?
yeah.
I was thinking about this one. The difference is that you're keeping the knight here to protect d4.
Mm-hmm.
If they take, you take with a knight. Now I see the computer bar is favoring white here for some reason, not because of this, I'm sure. That one we can deal with. What if he takes on d6? I mean, we can take with the pawn. We've already seen that type of position. I think black is okay here. So there must be some other, is the positional, the tricky positional stuff that is gonna, that I guess is giving white the advantage here. But is it obvious to me? Nope. It's really not that obvious. It looks like black has everything together pretty nicely here. Right, Lula? It's not so clear.
Yeah.
Why? What makes this better for white?
Well, I guess it's only plus 0.5 on mine. So
yeah, let's see.
It's not like.
Yeah, it's okay. He goes, there's multiple ways, in fact. That's the problem. Knight c4 is one. Okay, I thought it wasn't such a big deal, like we could take, but yeah, let's say defend that pawn like that. Like, I still don't see why it's so terrible. You know, it's yes, they have some pressure on the c file, but we've got this protected pass pawn. Seems okay, right? But let's see what is the computer's favorite way to defend this knight. Oh wow, he's still okay. This is where things get tricky. He still likes this move rook b6 that I kind of discarded, and winning a tempo to trade the bishops and ultimately go for that. Yeah. Yeah, I do know the computer loves putting that knight there, and it does come with a nice tempo, and kind of an annoying tempo. And then he's going to go e5, and who knows? I mean, of course, we would love to get the rook there. That's not so easy to do. King h1, knight e2, rook c4. It's nice to make the rook go there so the knight can't go there. And here we are. Okay, I just noticed that we got ourselves this outpost. That's quite nice.
That is a very nice outpost, yeah.
Yeah, so sharp position. This knight can't really move because of that pawn. So that's why in a lot of situations we go there to just protect that pawn. So this knight has some mobility. Yeah, they still have to be really careful with moving that knight because of that exchange sack. And overall, like if they go here, I think our knight is going just to c3, although I see both of these moves are possible. So the knight is also quite happy to be there. And by the way, queen g4 looks like a pretty juicy idea. So there's so much dynamism in this position, right? That I guess that's really the lesson that I'm taking away is that you want to look for those active ideas, right? So it's funny that not only rook b6 he looks at, also this knight b4 move. And they take, yeah, this one, I mean, it's still interesting, but I guess at some point they might be able to take that pawn on a7. So probably not. Yeah, no, this one makes a lot of sense. It's really quite convincing. And all
yeah,
the black.
I think we have a nice position after the bishops get traded actually, and the knights come forward.
Yeah, let's see if we have anything else to look at that we haven't yet in this particular position. So knight g6. Well, yeah, I think we kind of covered the main moves, Lula, because other than putting the rook on the c file or trading, there's really not a lot that's very logical. I mean, the rook coming here is certainly the whole white play is coming on these, especially the c file. So if they don't do that, if they play other moves, I think that our position can withstand it even better. All right, so let's go from this game to, you know what I think we need to do, Lula, is I guess download what we just looked at.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh yeah, we
all
can save.
Analysis, yeah, all this analysis will not be wasted. So let me make sure I have it here. Yeah. I have it and it's saved and it's now I'm gonna just save it and call this lesson 1. There we go. Perfect. So now we move on to, I guess we can look at another game in this line. And this is, I think, a very recent one my students played, which was not so great overall. So let's try to do it better. E4, E5. Knight f3, pawn takes, bishop takes. Knight c6, castles, bishop e6. Okay, so here we are back in this position. Bishop d6, right? So this time, instead of b3, white played knight d2. I mean, that's definitely a sensible move. Knight e7 and queen c4. Okay, so now, all right, queen c4. Yeah, I would just say one thing, Lula, is that although these positions are tricky to play as black, they're also tricky to play as white. It's really hard to get a grasp on all the things going on, actually, right? To be like, how do I not let black develop play against my king? And how do I deal with their passed pawn? And where do I put my queen and my knight and my rook and my bishop? Like, because there's lots of choices, right? So it won't be so easy for your opponents either. That's the good news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the positions seem a lot more open than other responses to d4.
Yeah, and okay, so what would you do here? So they just played queen c4. Let's say you're just looking at that move kind of with fresh eyes. What's your instinct about like what to play here?
I mean, they can't take on d4, so we don't need to protect it. So we could castle.
Yep, I'm pretty sure, it's a strong instinct in chess. Remember we said develop. Okay, I know we had that lesson about a week ago, Lula, but certainly we said that the opening is for development and, try to solve your opening problems through development. I'm pretty sure castles is a good move here. Yeah, it's one of the better moves, just castles, because as you said, white cannot take that pawn because in the end, they wind up losing their queen to bishop h2 discovery. So there's really no need to do anything. Although I see another move the computer likes in this position is also knight g6, which yeah, it's such a recurring theme. The knight is just that's where it's meant to go from the e7 square. And well, we'll see, let's say they would play king h1 actually. Let's see what happens if they do threaten our pawn. How to defend it. This is where it gets interesting, as there's actually so many ways to defend it, Lula. It's funny that that you can just do many things, right? So there's rook b4, actually looking nice. That's what that open file is for. I do like rook b4. And I also find this very instructive, what the computer is saying here. I think you will like this. Castle. Remember we said, just develop. Don't even defend the pawn. Right? Look at this instructive line. I mean, we're no longer winning the queen, but queen b5 and just kind of compensation for the missing pawn because of our better development and open files. But what are we threatening here? I mean, okay, their knight can't move, their rook is a little tied down. I think we're actually threatening perhaps, Lula, like something like queen h5. And I mean, by the way, queen e2 is obviously a great square for the queen as well. So I think we just have a lot of initiative here, right? Like, let's say they go, well, b3, they can't even develop because there's bishop e5. So white is having trouble getting their pieces out. Yeah, I think we have a lot of ideas here, Lula, with this queen. You got to just look at these squares because all of those may be possibilities. I mean, e5, I'm only showing in the case that white moves their queen away. I don't really want to trade the queens at the moment. But yeah, there's a ton of compensation here, Lula. This is really pretty cool. Like, like look at this line the computer is giving, G3, okay. And one of the answers is bishop takes G3. Oh. Wow, that pin. And let me just try to figure out the pin for this. Actually, I'm not going to look at the computer. So pawn takes, H takes G3, queen H5, king G1, knight F4, and we're going to get a perpetual if they take. Wow. I actually think it could be something like that, Lula. Let's try that. Pawn takes, bring in the queen. Yeah, it is that. Look at this beauty. Isn't that nice? Isn't that like kind of an inspiring journey for that? And if they take us, yeah. Oh, I like what Grandpa Simpson is saying. There's so much compensation in this line. It's pushing up the inflation rate. Yeah, good one. I like all the jokes about it, about the state of the world's economy. If they take, yeah, I don't know if we have a win, or I know we have at least perpetual. I think we might actually have a win if they take it, right? I mean, why not? We have the rook lifts coming up. So yeah, that's right. I mean, you can take the pawn for free. But this looks like, oh, we can't do that, Lula. You don't want to fall for this trap. I just realized. Oops.
Oh yes. No, that
I showed you that one.
Yeah.
Our first left. Bad. Yeah, that would be very unfortunate. And so we should just take here, and then we can probably here we can bring in the rook already. I think that looks fine. Maybe they have, yeah, they have F3. I let the king out. Oops. When you're attacking, don't let your opponent's king escape. So I need to do this a little bit better. How about a check here? There we go. And now I think this is gonna work. Rook F6. Wow, it's still not the best. It's amazing. I mean, I honestly would think that if they have to give up their queen, that we should be doing really well. I mean, we are doing well, but yes, they do have rook and 2 pieces for the queen, so it's not quite over. So we have to look for something better. Maybe rook F4. Yeah, there you go. Don't let them sack their queen. Yeah, that eval bar is being unnecessarily insulting to all my moves. I agree. Just can't make a move without being insulted. So, but okay, but we're learning some good stuff here. So yeah, it's interesting, Lula, that I think we're being shown this line is inherently very dynamic, and you just got to be prepared to play it actively. Look at the king side, this knight G6 move, it is meant to get you some actual king side play. So even though you don't have to sack the pawn on D4, you can just play rook B4, but castles is a very interesting move, right? So something to be considered. You're ahead in development after you castle. And so if they take your material, yeah, I mean, look at all your pieces. They are just beautifully developed. 2 open files for your rooks. Your bishop on D6 is excellent. Your knight is really good. I mean, we can see what the compensation is.
Yeah, for sure. Our pieces are definitely better.
Let's go back. And now I'm going to show you what you're not supposed to do. So I really didn't like the move E5 that my student played. I remember, being quite critical about this move at this point because, you generally don't want to shut down your bishop so early. So I'm not saying it's completely impossible to ever have your pawn on E5 in these lines. No. But you have to realize that you lose a lot of your dynamic play when you put the pawn on E5. So
yeah, definitely gives us a much worse piece.
Yep. And that's the thing. It's still not a tragedy, but white played knight G5. Yeah, you also can't castle. That's another thing I really didn't like about that. Quite sad. And even despite that, Lula, even this position is not actually that bad for black. It's just not. I mean, you still have that strong pawn in the center. And white played A3. And I think it was this next move. Oh, I really didn't like knight C8. Yeah, that was rather strange. Yeah, here you just push the knight back. and then you can get your knight out from the back rank. And actually, even before that, if you really want to be super prophylactic, yes, you have this weird move. I know that's very subtle. But the idea is to stop b4. The basic concept is, you're going knight e6, castling. And, even if you don't think about playing a5, I would say, okay, why is this so bad? Right? We have, as long as we, it's another thing we talked about, I think. Bad bishop, right? But Lula, there's a lot of other pieces on the board. That's what makes a difference, right? Now, if you traded off everything and you just like left, let's say a knight versus that bishop, yes, you might be losing in that end game, or at least suffering. But when there's so many other pieces on the board, that kind of compensates for that bishop. There are good elements to black's position. So yeah, it's playable. But basically, my advice is be careful about this move e5. Think about, how much of your dynamic play you're losing when you're blocking that bishop, and, look to see if you have options, and maybe that move generally played later in the game when you've made some gains, some other kinds of gains, then you can try to play e5. So, all right, let's move on. I'm sure I have other games in this line. How much should we stay on this line? Compared to the idea of moving on somewhere. Okay, how about we just take maybe one more peek at this line before we go on to the other white line against the Queen's Gambit accepted. So this one, e4, e5, knight f3, ed. Okay, a3. Now, I don't think we've seen that move in this position, right? We've seen e4 here, but that's what I mean. Like, it's not really like possible to guess all of the things that white can do. What's the point of a3? I guess it has a point, right? We saw that this square is kind of important for the rook, for the knight, and potentially white wants to play b4. So yes, I do think a3 is a sensible enough move by that someone can make it. Castle, I suppose. No, my student played rook b6. Yeah, I know we've seen that move a lot, and I know it can be quite okay, but it's the kind of move that makes me be very careful, because I'm committing my rook a little bit early, and then I have to constantly watch for that. So I guess the move that I would be playing here, it would be castles. And yeah, castles, b4, and knight to g6. Again, we are seeing this setup for black. So white has expanded a little bit on the queen side here. They've limited our rook. Let's take a look at some things that white can do. So what moves come to your mind here for white, Lula?
I was a little bit worried that white could play b5, but I don't think it's possible.
Which move do you think they're going to play?
I was wondering if they could play b5, but I don't think... just because of the pressure on d4, but I don't think it's playable, so I think that's fine.
Yeah, I bet, that somehow our dynamic chances will be quite okay, because their queen is going to get a little shut off on the side of the board, and, we're going to be attacking the b5 pawn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, someone is suggesting in the chat that you go, that if it were your move, it's not your move, but if it were your move, that you go there, hoping that they're going to take the pawn so you could win their queen, which is interesting. And I can say, Lula, there are times when you might want to advance that pawn to d3. I mean, it certainly gets stronger in general the further it moves up. But yeah, you just have to be careful you don't lose it. I would say it's not out of the question, that kind of advance. So in the chat, guys, we're looking for a move for white right now. It's not black's move. Black just played knight g6. And I was asking Lula what she thinks white might try here. So what else looks reasonable?
Well, I was wondering if it was possible to play knight c4, but then you said about all the exchange sacks on f3. So I was wondering if maybe that.
Yeah, I doubt it. I doubt that it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if my opponent played there, like, I mean, all I would look at, Lula, is the f3 square.
Yeah.
I just don't believe it. I just don't believe you can play chess like that, right? Like ostracizing your queen on a6, you know, leaving your king unprotected. I mean, yeah, don't even hesitate, Lula. Just sack the exchange and then think about how you're bringing in pieces, knight h4, right? I mean, how hard can it be to get like a good attack here, right? Well, I mean, now you can stop and think you've got so many moves, but probably the first one I would look at is this knight h4 move. Just bring in pieces, and they can't really afford to abandon their king like that. So our chat is suggesting bishop b2, certainly logical. You know, if you've made the fianchetto possible, yes, that's a good one, right? Developing a piece. I would also say my final move, I mean, queen c4 you can look at. It's a pretty typical square, but I agree, you know, bishop b2, you need to develop, don't you, in chess?
Yeah, this seems reasonable.
All right, so now let's get to our move, because this is like, we've kind of done the easy part, right? We've castled, we put our knight on g6, we know that much, but how we play these types of positions this is where we really got to show our skill. And threatening our pawn is the first question.
Well, if they take, we still have the check, right, to win back the pawn. So
I mean, probably, although we have to watch out in the end, they might be taking on.
That's true.
On
no, that's true.
Check. We still have a lot of play, I think. Yeah, I'm bringing you guys my secret knowledge from 30 years, pretty much 30 years of playing the Queen's Gambit accepted. Yeah, I started playing this opening when I was a kid. I know I was definitely playing it by age 11. So maybe it's not quite 30 years, but it's definitely, it's getting there.
So in terms of protecting the pawn, so we don't really want to play e5. I guess there's moving our bishop, but our bishop is nice on d6.
Yeah, so this is the question, this eternal question of this line, Lula. Do we play this move or not? Will we finally have to play this move? Right? There doesn't seem to be much point to go rook b6. At this point, sending the queen back to c4, yeah, I don't know why we would.
There's just more pressure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the nice point of e5 here is that you are blocking their bishop, right? You are making it less effective as well. Their bishop's not amazing. But are there more dynamic ways to play this? The problem is, if you move in like these knights, you will probably just wind up losing that pawn. Also, they're going to play rook c1. That's pretty clear. They're going to put pressure on that knight. And here's the other thing. I don't think we can go knight f4, because as nice as that looks and as attractive as that looks, are we not having a problem with this move? Because now we don't even.
But then I guess there's.
Oh, you thought about the fork?
Oh yeah, no. But can you play? Oh no, there's no rook b6 either.
Even if you couldn't take it.
I wonder if you can. Yeah.
Yeah, although there would be rook c6 there, but yeah, there's no rook b6. Now maybe we have something here. I see that eval bar is not hating this too much. So of course our powerful knight is giving us something. Is it this, Lula? Is it discovery, bring in the queen? That's interesting. What else could it be? Is it something? Oh, I rather like this idea. Yeah, I just came up with this one. Rook b5. Maybe like blocking out their queen, threatening knight e2. Oh, I see. Actually, yeah, Byte Spot is thinking the same thing. And also the rook lift seems really interesting. And this might be why the computer doesn't hate this position for black. Let's check it. Oh, well, rook b5 is a move, but unfortunately it's only the second favorite, and it might not be enough for full compensation after he finds this one, which saves the bishop from the fork and kind of protects the knight. It's a very solid square for the bishop. Yeah. Still interesting, but they might be trading off our powerful knight soon.
That's disappointing.
Yeah, I know, right? I really wanted this to work. This is what our chat is saying is correct. Bishop takes b4.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, the other discovery on this bishop, sure, why not? It does look like this is quite okay. Look at that powerful knight. I'm okay with this position for black.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah, so this is quite nice. So I really don't mind this line with knight f4. Yeah, I think knight f4 is one of the sensible moves here, Lula. I think it's definitely dynamic. But it's interesting that the computer also does give us this like other option of e5. So let's just try to understand why he doesn't mind it here. Why he doesn't mind killing off his bishop. So on rook c1, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna be going rook b6 or just knight e7? Or maybe even knight d8 to e6. I mean, knight e7 is not our only square here. Knight d8, queen a7. Do we just lose that pawn and then play knight e6? I mean, I think there's some value in that, for sure. I think also, like, I really think it's important to see the possibilities of that queen coming to g4. So I guess knight d8 would be the first move I would look at. Let's see. Yeah, computer agrees. He says that even though both of these are possible, knight ce7 is okay, but also knight d8, he does actually like the pawn sack. There we go. Material not taking precedence here, Lula. Yeah, I mean, really, it's all about the play on the king side. Like, we still have it. Yep. If they take our pawn, you just keep going. And, well, I think that just generally, this must be our idea. Right? So it looks like fun play, right, Lula?
Yeah, it definitely feels like black is more active.
Yeah. No, I mean, the more I look at it, the more I like, black's chances in these kinds of positions. So in any case, it's a tricky position for both sides to navigate. So that's what I would recommend against e4. It's a very principled move. You will probably see it, but I think, e5, it is a very solid line. I like lines where we try to solve our problems right away, Lula, right? Like, I've played knight of 6 too, a little bit, but in general, when you play a move like that, you're giving your opponent something tangible, the space advantage, right? When you play e5, you're trying to say to them, I'm not going to give you anything. I'm going to challenge you in the center in the most direct way. So there is something appealing about that. So, all right, now we covered that. Now we're going to go to the other main approach for white, which is regaining this pawn with either knight f3 or e3. And these moves are pretty much interchangeable. Yes, there's little differences, but like, let's just assume that we're not interested in going, you know, pawn e5 here, and that is an option for black, but we're just gonna develop. They're gonna take our pawn, and we e6, knight f3, c5, we start fighting for the center, and this is the tabia position of this line of the Queen's Gambit accepted. Now, there are alternatives here, Lula. You can play knight c6. That's a line that's gotten more popular recently, but I think if you're going to learn the Queen's Gambit accepted, it makes sense to learn from like really classical stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what this move a6 is. It's like, this is the classical approach to the Queen's Gambit accepted as a tabia position, where black tries to go for b5, the expansion on the queen side. And yeah, I mean, I guess when I think about why I've played the Queen's Gambit accepted my whole life, and like what I found appealing about it, what do you think it is, Lula?
It feels very well. I don't really have experience in it, but from what you've shown me, it feels very different to other responses to d4. It feels like black sets the pace a lot more.
Well, yeah, that's a little deceptive, because your conclusion is right from what I've shown you. I've shown you a very particular line that is not really that emblematic of the QGA as a whole. The QGA as a whole is going to be more like what we're going to look at now. You know, E4 is just such a particular aggressive by white that, yes, like the line I showed you, it is, yes, very different, non-standard, but it's not really emblematic of the usual Queen's Gambit accepted play. So the reason I like it is because black is trying to get a position without any bad pieces. No disadvantage in space and no bad pieces, right? So the usual bad piece in chess is that bishop on c8, usually blocked by the e6 pawn. And black is going to try to fianchetto it to the long diagonal, where he's going to be quite powerful, actually. This knight tends to go to d7, although there are positions where it goes to c6 as well. It's kind of like in the Sicilian Najdorf. Black also chooses, you know, well, in the Sicilian in general, does the knight go to c6 or d7? I would say we have a similar choice here. And yeah, we don't really have space problems, right? I mean, they have a pawn on d4. We're challenging it with a pawn on c5. There is often a trade of those pawns in some direction. Either white takes you or you take them. So that's the attraction of the opening. Like, we aim for good piece play. And if you achieve it, you get a very comfortable game. So white definitely has to be putting some pressure on you in these lines, right? So, you know, again, I just want to kind of point out, like, I'm teaching you this opening kind of like what I think is most applicable to, you know, what's going to happen in your games, right? Like, if I was told, you know, Irina, prepare an opening repertoire for a 2600 Grandmaster, like, okay, it would look somewhat different.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so basically, I mean, we're doing an overview, main ideas, things like that. I think that's just most useful. And just based from what I see in my student, who's not such a beginner, she's not tested that often in like very critical lines. Like, one line here that is kind of critical is this bishop b3 move, where white moves back the bishop. And then if you go b5, they sack this pawn. So has someone done this against her? Yes, like, you know, people who are close to master level might do that. You know, do you need to worry so much about that? Like, not really. I mean, don't take the pawn. You can play bishop b7, bishop e7, just kind of focus on development. You might take the pawn on d4 at some point. It is certainly a very testing line for whites, but I would say, again, it's more of like a particular line, and in your games, you're more likely to see your opponents play moves like a4 to stop b5. You might see them allow b5. I've actually seen that quite a bit in some of her recent games. Actually, let me show you something here. 1 second. Oh, where are these games? What could be most useful? Okay, well, let me show you a game that went really well for her. And believe it or not, this was played by a master level player as white. So he's not a beginner by any means, like over 2200. And yet, Lula, I'm going to be pretty critical about white's play.
Okay.
So here we are. And yeah, so fundamental approaches by white. So this is, there's A4 stopping B5. That's like one line. After that, we're putting our knight out on C6. There's approaches where white doesn't stop B5. And then there's the approaches where white moves their bishop back prophylactically in anticipation of B5. And then there's finally that approach where they take your pawn and kind of steer you into an end game, which feels a little boring. And I just don't think you're going to see that much of that unless you're going to be playing lots of GMs. You know, Vladimir Kramnik, he did that against Kasparov, but I'm not sure you're going to see it very much. Nothing to really fear, I think, in this end game. So this game went queen e2. Okay, white allows us to play b5. And then we just immediately get the bishop out. In this line, you do actually focus on the queen side. So bishop b5, b7, knight d7. I would say we even do that before we start thinking about castling. That's actually one of the features of this line. And rook d1. Okay, so they're lining up the rook with the queen. We have to think about, is this a big deal? What should we do? I would say develop, right? Remember, Lula? Just develop. Right? That's a good way to solve the problem because now, you know, now your queen is protected. Is this boring play from white that puts me off the queen QGA? Yeah, you're talking about the end game line on taking on c5. Well, yeah, that's a part of it, but I still find that my student has basically faced that like once or twice. And I'm talking about this move, Lula, and one of her games was against Grandmaster Alexandrov in an online game. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, if a GM wants to do that, they can, but it's certainly not a super popular move at like the club level. So I just don't think you have to worry too much about it. So queen e2, b5, bishop b3, bishop b7. Okay, so black has developed the queen side. a3. Okay, so already a3 is kind of like, what? I can tell you, Lula, this is not very thematic by white to play a3. Okay. It's kind of a pretty lame looking move. I mean, I would say if white wanted to play a4, that would at least, you know, that would at least make more sense. And we see that sort of thrust by white a lot more often in these positions. So you do want to, yeah, be ready for this kind of move. Well, what do you think? Like, well, what's your instinct about how you would respond to such an attack?
I mean, I don't think we want to capture. We can, I guess we can push, but then they can play a5. I think we can ignore it and develop. Maybe.
Maybe ignore it and develop. Well, by the way, yeah, I think that's an option because if they take, rook takes, queen takes. I mean, you might have like some bishop f3 at the end. I mean, okay. So here's what I would say. Yeah, I mean, that's right. You can follow my advice. I'm like so surprised. I was like, that's what I've told you to do, right? Yeah, just ignore it and develop.
At first I was wondering if we could play like c4, b4, but then I think that one of the pawns is going to hang, or like c4 and then I don't know.
So I would say this move is kind of a rare answer in these positions, just because even though it looks pretty tempting, like you're defending your pawn with a tempo, ultimately these pawns, they do get undermined, right? Like we can expect white to play b3. interesting. The computer doesn't hate this move. And I was thinking about it, like, but also white wants to play e4. They want to expand in the center. So I do feel like there's a lot of pressure on us here to like come up with like something really excellent right now. That could be the move. I don't know, knight e4, moving the knight for the second time in the opening. Maybe, but I'm a little skeptical. I'm a little skeptical about this move c4, Lula. I think it'll be difficult to handle. So something that's typical here is b4. Okay. This is just a super typical structure of the QGA, where you move past them. You do give up that square into their hands, which is important because they're going to put their knight there. But on the other hand, okay, you took some space. Their bishop on c1 is not so good. The queen side is closed and your pawn is safe. So that's one answer that I would look at. There are moments when we can take here, but I don't think this is one of those. I mean, they take with their bishop. We're not really castled. They're going to have us in like pin. Yeah, they're going to bring in their knight. Probably not. Right? And also, yeah, of course, in general, it's kind of a very simplifying line. Things get traded, and black generally can't play for more than a draw here. But in terms of what you suggested, just bishop e7, let's see if that works. Look at that. I think the computer is quite okay with that. They take, you take, they take, and you take. And because of that pressure, it's not really possible for them to take that pawn, because you're one move away from castling, completing development. Their king is rather weak. And look at that, Lula. You see, I'm so happy, that you just used that logic and really came up with something that I wasn't even thinking about. Yeah, development can be a very good approach to, the problems that we're experiencing in the opening. So lots of options here, right, Lula? So what I'm showing you is kind of like typical answers, typical structures. But I can just tell you that, of course, a4 is a very typical kind of move by white where they're trying to get that c4 square from you. And b4 is like 100 times more common than c4 as an answer in these positions. So if you're thinking about c4, just, really think about it, because it has its downsides as well. So in this game, white played a3. So like I said, that move is not stressing anybody out. No. It puts no pressure on your position. It's just like, if your opponent wants to waste time, which, by the way, white players do a lot in these lines, like, fine, let them do it. So black just continues developing. Knight c3. Okay, so I guess white said something like, I want to put the knight on c3, and so I'll play a3, but no, it doesn't really make sense. And now we just castle. So this is what we're going for in the QGA, Lula. Like this, just like kind of remember this position. It's pretty simple. You can see no bad pieces. You're not cramped. Nice diagonal for the light squared bishop. And this queen can go, usually I would say to c7, sometimes to b6, sometimes to e7 if there's a capture on c5. You take with the bishop, rook on c8. So lots of piece play, not so many pawn chains, let's say, in this line. So Akiva is asking about knight d5. Well, by black, I guess. I don't know which point you meant exactly, Akiva, but generally, I mean, yeah, we don't want to be moving same piece in the opening again, like before we get our king side out. We definitely don't want to be, we don't want to be walking into this e4 move. So knight d5 could be an idea for like much later, but for now, we just want to focus on our development. Super Patzer asked us if queen a5 is a move. I suppose you meant like somewhere around here. Yeah, you don't, or maybe later. But yeah, I would say it's not a super typical square for the queen in these lines, whether it's now or later. And of course, for now, we just really want to get that king side out. So let's see a few more moves of this game, Lula. So already black has had a successful opening.
Mm-hmm.
And now white plays h3. So yeah, it was like, I was just truly surprised to see these kind of meek pawn moves from a master level player. Like, okay, queen, rook c8, sure, it's a normal move, you know, nothing wrong with rook c8. Knight e5. Okay, so white starts lashing out. Okay. It's not a very scary move. I mean, we have lots of responses. I mean, you can consider taking and going knight d7, but that would probably be the one that you really need to think very carefully about. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but when you're changing pawn structure, Lula, you got to do it carefully. So since your position is already pretty good, maybe you just want to keep things the same. So what kind of moves would you think about here?
I do get a little bit stressed when the queen and the rook are on the same file.
Yeah, good.
So I would maybe consider playing either queen c7 or queen b6.
Yeah. I would say actually they both look possible to me. Let's see.
Maybe queen c7 puts more pressure on that knight on e5 though.
Yep. So queen c7 is what my student played. Very good instinct. Get your queen out of that file and keep it in the center. Yes, and attack their knight, make them make a decision. White captured. And here, you know, interesting decision by my student, which I think was correct. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with knight takes, but she took with the queen, basically saying like, look, this is not a problem because if you take queen c6 and I'm just going to threaten you with mate and get the pawn back, so no harm, and that way I keep my knight on f6 like a little more active. f3, yeah, this was such ugly play by white. It was like, I get it, you want to neutralize the bishop. Yes, that bishop has a lot of power, that's why we're putting him there. But like the combination of f3 and h3 and leaving, you know, those dark squares weak around your king, I mean, like none of that is impressive at all. So she played queen c7. Okay, sure, one of the possible moves. And then bishop d2. And now this move is another move that really didn't impress me, Lula. So what is a good option here? I mean, black's position contains many good options, but what would you do?
I would maybe be inclined to just bring the other rook, the f rook, to d8, potentially.
Can't be a bad move for sure. I mean, it's certainly one of the logical options.
I guess I would also look at now that the rook on c1 is blocked, if captures is good, if c takes d4.
Well, what do you think about that one?
Well, it gives them an isolated queen pawn, which is I would say is good for us.
Yep. Yeah, this is definitely a very simple decision, Lula, that I think you should pounce on.
Okay.
Because what you're doing here is you're getting a tangible long-term advantage. And there are, of course, isolated pawn positions that come out in the QGA that are not bad for white, but this is not one of them. This is a easily recognizable bad isolated pawn. Why? Well, one pair of pieces has already been traded off. That works in black's favor because white is supposed to be trying to attack here. Another problem, I don't know, bishop is passive. These pawns are kind of like weaknesses around the white king. Black has perfect control over d5. There's just no pressure on black's position at all. And white has the isolated pawn, right? So this is a complete failure of an opening for white, right? So that's where we're going to stop. We're not going to continue on with this game. But yeah, I mean, this is kind of like where you're trying to go, Lula, when your opponent plays in this lackadaisical fashion with like no real pressure on you, right? So like develop the queen side, bishop b7, knight d7, develop the king side, bishop e7, castle, look at the center, start thinking about your queen and rooks, and finally pay attention to the pawn structure in the center, because obviously we are always welcoming the chance to make a favorable transition in the center where our opponent gets stuck with an isolated pawn that that we can attack. So that is an example of a very comfortable game for Black. Now, Lula, we are going to go to something where my student had more problems. Let me see. Oh yeah, this is a good one. So one of the very important pawn structures that comes out of the Queen's Gambit accepted is actually that isolated pawn, with white having that isolated pawn. And yeah, you do want to know how to handle that a little bit, Lula. So we're going to talk about it, because yeah, you cannot play the Queen's Gambit accepted without knowing a little bit about the IQP, right? So we have the QGA and the IQP, and they're really, really tied to each other. So here's our tabia position. White played A4, yes. Pretty common move. They just clamp down, don't let you play B5. So we go knight C6, knight C3. And so here my student made a little bit of a mistake. She took this pawn a little early. Yeah, you got the timing of that trade right, because you know, well, bishop e7. Yeah, bishop e7 is the main move here, but she captured. You know, I wouldn't say it's a disaster, but you know, it is early to go for the IQP here. So, oh, and then she goes here. Yeah. So like, look, first she got into the IQP. Then she was like, oh, this is a really big problem. Like, my opponent can push that pawn. You always want to look for that idea, Lula, because sometimes the game opens up and in white's favor. So then she's like, let me go here. Now, in a way, all these moves are thematic. Yes, you do want to control that square. You do want to put a knight there. But the problem is your development's not so good, right? Like look at white's development, look at yours. I mean, we're breaking some big rules here, moving the same piece in the opening again, not castling.
Yeah, for sure.
So bishop here. I don't know if that was the best move. I think if I was white, I would probably, well, of course, that knight moving in is one of the typical ideas for white, like really active square that I would look at. White played there, we developed, rook c1. Okay. Oh, we love to see moves like that, Lula. Why do we love to see moves like that in the isolated queen pawn positions?
Because they're not supporting the pawn?
Well, yeah, it's very paradoxical, I would say. In most positions, whenever you see an open file, you know that a rook belongs there. And I would say that the IQP positions are one of the few exceptions to that, where you don't really want your rook on c1 all that often. And the reason is you're not really going to be able to use that file. Too many pieces are in the way. Black is going to, you know, be able to control those infiltration squares, and it's not easy to clear out those two minor pieces. I mean, the bishop you can clear out, but like clearing out the knight from c3 is a pretty difficult task, because he needs to be here to control that square. He's actually on his best square. So what's the point of putting the rook on c1 if it's not going to get an open file, right? So when you see a move like that, Lula, that is a great sign, because it means that your opponent kind of has only a vague idea of where their pieces belong in these positions, and they're not really putting maximal pressure on you. Where do the rooks actually want to go? They want to be e1, d1. That is the default position of the rooks, and where they're supporting the isolated pawn, possibly helping it move. The rook is over here, very effective. for the attack, for the d5 move, for like sacrifices on f7 and then pressure on the e file. So if I were white here, well, certainly rook c1, not the move, but queen e2. Queen e2 is a move I would look at. So you can set up the rooks in the center. And also knight e5. Basically those two moves. I really wouldn't look at anything else for white here. So rook c1. And now, yeah, white castled. Okay. Knight e5. So now white makes a move that I think we can understand. It does make sense. It's a nice active move. And here I think is where my student starts to really, go wrong, right? So like we have to figure out how to complete our development. Right? So I want you to kind of think of what would you do for black?
I think we probably want to get our light squared bishop out somewhere.
Yeah, how are you going to?
Well, yeah, I was going to say b6. It would be nice if we were able to play b5, but I don't think we are.
I'm full
so
term
b6.
now.
But there's a little problem with b6. Like, yes, you want to do it. And maybe we will do it. In fact, we might just do it. But what could be the problem with b6?
I guess we have to calculate if they can play d5 and push the pawn.
That's why we have those two knights there, Lula, because they give us really excellent control over the outpost square. Yes. I think this move is not so dangerous for us right now, especially because they don't have a rook on d1. But Aliyat says yes. Queen f3, right. The knight fork would be very dangerous. Thankfully, we have a knight, Bruzmak, controlling that square. Otherwise, we would certainly not appreciate that fork. But this move is a little annoying.
Yes.
Right. And also, one very common thing in the isolated pawn positions, Lula, is this sort of the use of the third rank for the rooks or the queens to come over to the king side to attack. So you want to always be on the lookout for that. But maybe this is not such a big deal. Can't we just go rook b8 and still just get to play bishop b7? Once we put that bishop on b7, we can breathe a sigh of relief. I think it's working out okay. You see, Lula? What is the key here? Key is good control over that square in front of the isolated pawn. Obviously, all your development's completed. Yeah, and as long as white doesn't have some crazy attack going against this king, I think it's fine. So it's a little awkward to have to go rook b8. We wish we could just play bishop b7 immediately, but I think our position can handle that loss of tempo. What's another way we can make this bishop better?
Well, bishop d7 is possible. Then knight on e5 is definitely currently better than our light squared bishop.
Yeah, that's right, Lula. This is also a very typical way to develop the bishop, and we don't mind the trade at all. This is one of those positions when giving up a bishop for a knight is not a problem, not just because their knight is active, but also because we don't mind trading pieces in these isolated pawn positions because we're the ones playing against the isolated pawn. By the way, Aliyat says, take the e6 pawn off the board when no one is looking. Well, I actually don't want to do that, guys, because then that opens up the full power of that bishop to the f7 pawn. So I really don't want to remove our e6 pawn at all. I'm quite happy with what that pawn is doing for our position. But yeah, bishop d6, and by the way, bishop c6. Bishop c6 is coming, right? So just kind of recognizing a few key ideas, Lula, that if you're playing against the isolated pawn, you don't mind the trade of pieces. The more we trade, the closer we get to just getting an attack on that pawn. And just we need the full mobilization, right? Because Here my student did something really weird, just very strange. It was like rook a7. I mean, wow, yeah, sure, maybe in some beautiful world you can play b6 and rook c7, maybe the rook can come out like that, but just this seems rather artificial. I just wouldn't even look in the direction of moves like that. And white played rook e1, kind of normal, and b6, queen d2, okay. I mean, I don't know if that's the best move, but you're gonna see, yeah, this whole thing, I would just much rather have the rook on, yeah, on b8, you know.
The rook is in jail.
Yeah, the rook is in jail. I don't know why. I mean, maybe at least rook c7. It might not even be so bad. I mean, to be honest, if you have it like this, it's actually okay.
Yeah.
Fine. So this, for the point of view of harmony, I mean, leaving that rook in on a7 is really not attractive. And now this stuff happens.
Oh.
Yeah,
that's bad.
You feel like you actually want to really pay attention to that square when there is a knight on e5. That kind of sacrifice is always in white's sights. There's a bishop there, there's a rook there, there could be like a queen on e2. And so is it that shocking that that move happens? Not really that shocking. And they're already gonna get, you know, rook and 2 pawns for the 2 pieces. It's not so necessarily so clear, but like given that our rook here is not really in the game, like sometimes these sacrifices are actually acceptable for black. The 2 pieces do a good job, but you know, the details really matter. And ultimately, you know, black didn't really cope with this position and lost. So you definitely want to pay a lot of attention to all those 3 squares in this position, Lula, for, you know, kind of different reasons, but they're all really important. All right, so now it's like we're processing a lot of information. Yeah, it's a little challenging like that. Let's go to, let's see if I can find another structure. Another structure with the isolated pawn. So we just did that one. That one, oh, I think was just a dream. So I want to find something where she was a little bit more challenged. Yeah, okay, this is a good one. I've noticed that this move has been played against her a number of times recently. So look at this move, Lula. Sorry, here's our starting position of this line, and knight d2 looks a bit weird, doesn't it? Like it doesn't stop b5, and it's a, you know, a little bit of a passive square for the knight compared to c3. And yet, there's some trickiness involved. So the obvious move would seem to be b5, right? Since they didn't stop you, why not just do it? But I have a feeling this might not be the best move. b5, bishop e2, and bishop b7. All right, so here, Lula, based on what we have learned today, what is a typical move you might expect from your opponent?
a4.
a4, very good. And now we have that big choice to make. You know, c4, b4, knight d7, I don't think works here because I think they really will take our pawn and we will just lose a pawn.
Yeah.
Pawn takes, you know, maybe you really can always look at that move. I don't love to play that move. It's a little bit boring, but it's not always objectively bad. Like I don't think it's a disaster if you take that pawn. But black played b4, and suddenly we kind of see the point of this knight d2 move, right? I mean, they put their knight perfectly to go to these squares.
Mm.
And their bishop got tucked away. And yeah, now they played a5. Yeah, that makes some sense. They want control. It's maybe not their only move. Maybe, yeah, okay, knight c4, the computer likes, maybe even b3, bishop b2. But I would say that a5 is a pretty thematic move whereby they get themselves that square, they fix that pawn as a target for the long run. Knight d7, queen a4. Okay, a little bit of a strange maybe handling by white, like that early queen development. They make us move the bishop again. Where should our bishop go? I would say e7, or maybe even d6 would be my thinking. Now there we go. That looks normal. Okay, yeah, actually, I would say that now black is looking quite all right. There's the knight on b3 is not super effective. And we got our very typical QGA pawn structure where, I mean, there is no pawn structure. It's gone.
We have very nice bishops as well.
Yep. We got the beautiful bishops, no bad pieces. We're about to castle. They've still got this, suboptimal bishop on c1. And I was thinking rook c8, okay, looks fine, stopping knight c6. Yeah. I mean, somewhere here was probably a key moment, actually, Lula, because I think my students started going wrong within the next few moves like this, and now they're forced to give up the bishop, and then they have problems forever. This is actually probably a good moment to stop and think, like, what to do for black. Yeah, you gotta, always notice your opponent's ideas, right? He's not just putting the rook on the open file to make it look nice. There's an actual plan there.
Yeah, I guess the only move that prevents it is knight e5.
Yeah. I would say so. I mean, the only thing I would, wonder about is there, by the way, if we go knight e4, they'll probably be moving that bishop away from us. That's quite typical, although we might play knight e4. I wouldn't say it's a bad move at all. Not a bad move to consider, for sure. If we're going to play it, knight e5, they might play f4.
That's true.
Go maybe to g4. And then there's h3. Then your knight might have to go to h6. But on the other hand, then you have the e4 square. I mean, another move, okay, I would look at knight b8. I don't know how bad that move is. It's a little passive, yes, I agree. But on the other hand, at least it controls that square, right? But it is, it is a little passive. So I would say that knight e5 should be idea number one. So your instinct is definitely good.
What if f4?
Yeah, so f4, I think we will just be going with knight g4. Now they are producing a lot of weaknesses in their position as well by playing this way. So this is not sort of a nothing move. This is a serious commitment.
Yeah.
Weakened e3 pawn, weakened e4 square, gave us an outpost. And if on knight g4, they play knight c6, okay. Or maybe even kick us away. And then play knight c6. That's the question. What do we do here? Well, there's a big difference with our rook being there and our rook not being there.
That's true. There's no fork. So You could, I suppose you could just move the queen. I guess you could move. Okay, so I was going to say, I guess you could go to either d7 or e8, but I probably wouldn't want to put it in line with the rook on d1. So queen e8.
Yeah, I think it feels
a little bit passive, but
it feels fine to put it in line, Lula, because we're just attacking them, right? We're not.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, maybe you can go to e8. I wouldn't say that you can't as well. Like,
it does feel more passive though.
Yeah, maybe not a big deal. I mean, the main thing is that I think we're going knight. Well, okay, you've got a lot to look at here. You got to look at knight d5, really pressing them on that knight c6 issue. And I think that makes a lot of sense. You can look at knight f5. But then you have to watch out for e4, but then you have bishop c6. I mean, even this is possible. Trying to go to h4. So I think Black even managed to get quite a normal position, Lula, right? As you would expect, because in this position, well, Black has no problems with bad pieces, no problems with space, no problems with king safety. So why should they have a bad position? Right? So just important to watch out for your opponent's ideas, because in the game, Black played like this. And after that fork, had to give up a really important bishop. And yeah, like here, you know, that pawn is weak. That pawn is still weak. And White has the bishop pair. I can definitely believe that things are going downhill here for Black. Yeah, this is not going to solve the problems of the position. Sure, you can save your material, but you've already given up some serious advantages, right, Lula? So this is an example of, you know, things going downhill, but overall, you know, Black played sensibly enough, right? So on, you know, maybe White has some pressure here, but, you know, knight c4, b3, bishop b2, and you do your development. It's just like a very normal course of events for this line. But maybe on knight d2, we don't have to go b5, because this move is logical but not forced. And I remember I was looking at this with the computer a little bit, and he seemed to like this capture on d4 in this position.
Okay.
I don't know if that take d4. Of course, we want them to take with the pawn, but they're not going to. They're going to take with a knight. So does this really make sense? b5. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like maybe this is also a little suboptimal, like White has all these annoying moves. So maybe this is also not the best. This pawn takes d4. What else can we do? Knight c6. Always a move, always a question where that knight should go. I would say that putting it on c6 can never be, you know, a big mistake. Although we kind of like to do that after pawn a4. So b5, yeah, b5, bishop e2, bishop b7 is logical. And going for that. Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I know the computer will favor White somewhat, but it's still like a very thematic pawn structure, Lula, that, you know, it's good to know that, yes, I can play this. This is like normal for me. Like, even if they play like this, I go, you know, knight d7, play bishop e7, play castles, play queen c7. It's still very normal. You got a couple of nice squares there in the center that you can use for your pieces. So yeah, that's you know, a little start to the Queen's Gambit accepted, Lula.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you know, I think we did actually all right to cover a lot of the main themes in this opening in just these a couple of hours. And I wanted to look at a couple of maybe one cool game that I saw today, if you have the time for that.
Yeah, of course, I would love to.
Okay, cool. Just to give us a little bit of a break from like all the serious openings. let's look at more entertaining things. I really liked this game that Gadakamsky played on the way to winning or to winning his spot in the Global Chess Championship qualifier. So I wanted to bring up that game. He won this game in such a nice positional way. He was black, playing another Grandmaster. So he goes for his E6 Sicilian, Con Sicilian, with the Maroczy binds line. Not going for Bishop B4, trying to equalize, just going for this. D6, allowing white to just have a space advantage. So Maroczy bind. All right. Yes, white is supposed to be better in these positions. And H5. Okay. Making things more unbalanced, not just going castles, but going for H5. And I mean, it's not completely unusual in these positions. Like, is it dubious? Maybe, but there's certainly a point behind this H5 move. So white tries, white tries to stop H5 from happening. Okay. Rook C8, Rook C1, Knight E5, B3. Okay, all these moves make sense. Knight D7. White decides to push this knight out of the center. Knight G4. All right. Yeah, I wouldn't mind if you gave me the bishop, and I think he actually did. I guess he doesn't have much of a choice because one of his bishops is going. So he gives up this one. Plays F5. Finding the weak spot in black's position. Especially because black is not castled yet, Lula.
Yeah, that's when I would start to feel a little bit uneasy, I think.
Yeah, if they take, get the knight there, it's going to be painful. So Gata decides to close things up. Now, this move is a real concession, right? Because it's not like he really wants to give away the square. But I guess he didn't feel like he could protect that pawn in a different way and also maintain king safety. Yeah, I mean, okay, knight c5 is a move you got to look at because it also threatens the fork. But I guess they're just going to take. That's the opening of this file is going to be really unpleasant.
Yes, that's scary.
Yeah, so Gaza played e5, knight here. This is where I started looking at this game. And, well, white just wants to go knight e3 and occupy that square. So I definitely felt like black had some positional problems here. He offers his opponent a trade of his worst piece. There's a point in this game where white loses the advantage. Like, that's the point I want to try to find.
Yeah.
You know, what black did made sense, right? Like, he had a really bad bishop and he didn't need it, so he traded it off. Now he's attacking that. I think, was it this move? Yeah, he starts to lose it. Like, queen e2 seemed nice attacking this pawn. Was there anything better? Well, if you go there, is there a problem with knight takes e4? But then queen e2 and then queen h4. Yeah. How about this knight? I mean, it's interesting, but of course this knight will get captured, right? We're gonna take it. What to take it with, Lula?
I feel like I would consider taking with the bishop.
Yeah, you're right, because if you with a knight, the bishop just gets blocked. He's really bad, so you might as well give him away. And I think black is okay here because the most important thing about outpost squares is as long as you can challenge for them, right? Like white's not really get ownership of that square. I think black will ultimately be okay here. So it wasn't as simple as just going into that outpost. Yeah, so he played queen e2. But now Gata decides now if he takes like that, there's going to be a capture ultimately on g4. And then you're going to lose that pawn. So he took like this. This was very interesting. And this is probably where he starts to go wrong. I think knight takes g4, the bishop went back, and he basically got away with opening up that bishop, getting rid of the e4 pawn, and everything is fine for black. So I think right here, white probably needed to go for this, and now what? Which way to take? Actually, with the knight looks kind of nice. Because queen takes also looks nice, but there's this one saving move.
Yeah. Whereas you have to move the knight if knight takes g4, right?
I mean, doesn't this feel better for white? Because that bishop is not alive on the board. And then the knight is hanging. And it has to go back. And what do you think we're going to do here for white?
I'd be inclined to put more pressure on the E and D files. I don't know about trading because knight takes, queen takes, and seems okay.
Yeah, but probably you don't really want to help them develop their queen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very fundamental question, I feel, that white is facing. Fundamental, question is, do we want to trade the knight or not? Because there's kind of points to both. I mean, I can see knight e3 being a good move. It's like, it's a good knight. You keep an eye on this square. Gonna play rook d1. I would still rather be white here for sure. But maybe it's not the best move. Let's see. Maybe it's like some kind of rook d1. Yeah. Some sort of rook d1 move like that. Just moseying over to that pawn was more appropriate. So I do think, Gata was under some pressure in this game, Lula, right? This square, this outpost square, it's like you have to be very careful in handling those weak squares. But he acquitted himself comfortably because his opponent did not capture his bishop. He just let that bishop stay on the board, turned it into a great piece. And the game started going in a different direction here. He played a very strong move, b5. This was a great move. Because the idea is that when white takes the pawn, now your queen can get out of the pin with check, right? Like super active move, like very dynamic, using the position of the rook, undermining like white space. It's like a good move from like every single point of view, tactical and positional. And king h1, I think he traded the knight so that knight e5 wasn't going to happen. He took that pawn. If they take ours, I guess queen h4 is a really big idea. And here, the king in the center is surprisingly viable.
Yes, as actually somehow got a little house there.
Yep, and like got the beautiful open files and open diagonals. Don't we love that? And queen d7, so he offers the queen trade, so that way the king comes out, king is going to be perfectly positioned in the end game. Yeah, the end game is like a dream for black because the c4 pawn is weak, and the black king is just going to be so much better and useful than the white king. And the game ended quickly here. White tried to stay in the middle
Judy,
game,
thank you
but
so
that
much
middle
for the 10
game
gifted
was
subs. Thank you.
not the best place to be either. So that was kind of the end, right? You're just getting mated. Yeah, looks beautiful. Looks beautiful. In the end, Gatsa didn't even have to castle his king. You see the value of those open files, open diagonals, kind of strong center protecting his king. And yeah, I think basically it comes down to you can't let your opponent have great pieces, right? Once that bishop opened up on the diagonal, the trend of the game completely changed. And so his big chance in this game was to get rid of that bishop and leave him with a knight that was, definitely not going to be as problematic for white. And here white could count on an advantage based on the fact that black's king is not so secure. There's the backwards pawn, there's the outpost square, there's that hanging pawn. No, sorry, not this move, but after taking the pawn like this, yeah. And even in the heavy piece endgame, black is under pressure because of the king situation, because of the weaknesses. So I guess the lesson from this little game is, try not to leave your opponent with powerful pieces. Once that bishop starts pointing at your king completely unrestricted, he starts exerting a lot of power on the position. All right, so yeah, I guess I'm gonna let you finally relax a little bit, Lula.
Thank you so much. It sounds like you've had a very busy day.
Yeah, I know. It's like I'm still alive. Now I can put some food into my body. I haven't eaten anything. Yeah, I know it's been busy, but I'm going to get a little bit of a break, and I'm going to see you in a couple of days on a Sunday, Lula. We will be meeting after the Rapid Chess Championships on chess.com.
Yes, I'll see you for our last lesson just before the Olympiad. Are you excited?
Yeah. I am excited. Yeah, I'm leaving on Monday night. Got still a lot of things to do. But yeah, I think it's going to be awesome to get back to the board and play in the biggest chess festival that we have.
I'm really looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, and I've been following Irina from stream to stream, and I'm tired. I can't imagine how tired she is. Yeah, don't imagine it, guys. All right, Lula, I will see you in a couple of days.
Thank you so much. See you on Sunday. Bye-bye.